My name is Sabrina Plager, and me and my husband lead in Ann Arbor, Michigan at the University of Michigan and Eastern Michigan University. And then on the right, that's Hannah Persing and her husband Mark and her oldest son, and her youngest is actually on her right now, sleeping. They lead in New York as well. And so we have the honor of speaking to you guys today about this concept of going from timid to transformed. So before I start us off, I kind of want to just talk about like an example of what timidity can look like, kind of a little bit of a story. So I want you to picture this. You're sitting in a class and the professor asks a question and you know the answer. And in fact, you're pretty sure you're right, that you have the right answer. And your hand even starts to come up, but then the thoughts start. Well, what if I'm wrong? What if everyone looks at me? What if I sound stupid? So your hand just slowly goes back down. And a few seconds later, another student raises their hand and gives the exact answer you were thinking. A lot of us have probably had that happen in this room, or something like that. And nothing bad actually happened to you, like no one laughed at you, no one rejected you, but fear convinced you to stay hidden, convinced you to put your hand down. And I think that's one of fear's greatest tricks. It doesn't always have to ruin your life in some dramatic way. Sometimes it just like quietly whispers, don't raise your hand, don't speak up, don't let people really know you, just stay where it's safe. And before long, fear isn't just influencing one moment, it starts shaping the way you live. So I wanted to kind of ask you guys and just get to know some of the women in this room. What are some of the things you guys are afraid of? And I can take some responses. You can keep it as general and as deep as you want. I figured this would be a hard question for this room.
I think there's like making mistakes and like not being perfect and like get in my own head and like I have to like meet up to these standards. I have to do the right things, and if not, people are gonna judge me. I'm not as good of a disciple, or I'm like not doing the right things.
Yeah, that pressure of being perfect is heavy. Yeah, anyone else? Right here?
Just like wasting my life.
Yeah, like not taking every opportunity you get. Yeah. Anyone else? Right there.
There's like being too much, not saying the right things, and definitely going for like how people
Yeah. Yeah, that weight of what people think of you can really be loud. Yeah, anyone else? Right there.
I'm scared of facing my own problems and specifically me, my people's voice and goals, ignoring the fact that I like girls as well, instead of realizing I am not able to choose the things
Yeah.
I'm attracted to, but I'm able to not indulge in that attraction.
Wow, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. One more.
I think for me, sometimes I'm spiritually timid because either I don't want to see the answer or I think about the answer over and over and I'm terrified of how it's going to work out in my life and what is my path going to look like when I'm taking the answer.
Yeah, the truth can be scary. It's like you have a choice of denial or overthinking. You're like, which one? Neither one is a great choice. But there's so many things that we can fear. Fear is so big, and fear can look like anxiety. It can look like people pleasing. It can look like perfectionism, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being vulnerable, fear of not being enough. It wears a lot of different disguises. And if we let it, it slowly begins to make our world smaller. We stop taking risks, we stop speaking up, we stop reaching out, and we just stop believing that God can do something super different with our lives. So today we're going to read this amazing story about this woman whose fear wasn't imagined. It came from a very real medical condition. But because of the way people treated her and the shame she carried, her suffering didn't just affect her body, it began to shape the way she saw herself as well. So we're going to be over in Mark 5. It's on the screen as well if you want to read it up there. But Mark 5, verse 24 to 34. And this is the story of the bleeding woman. So I'll go ahead and start reading that. So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors, and she had spent all that she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, so he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." So my first point for today is hidden. In this story, the bleeding woman spent a lot of her life hidden. Fear thrives when it's hidden. This woman would have been considered ceremonially unclean in her time, which means she's isolated, ashamed, and hidden. Just to give you a little bit of context on that, like in Leviticus, in chapter 15, verse 25, it says, "When a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as she has that discharge, just as the days of her period. Any bed she lies on with her while her discharge continues will be unclean, as is her bed during her monthly period, and anything she sits on will be unclean, as during her period. Anyone who touches them will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening." I was like, why is there so many rules? It's like, it doesn't make sense. But it makes sense if you understand the context of the Old Testament. And then it continues and says, "When she is cleansed from her discharge, she must count off 7 days, and after that she'll be ceremonially clean. On the 8th day, she must take 2 doves and 2 young pigeons and bring them to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting and bring sacrifices of it," and on and on and on. So imagine if this is how you were treated. Like if you had this condition and this is what it took to be clean. And the bleeding never stopped though. Like this discharge that they're talking about, he was like, when it stops, then you can do these things to be clean. Hers didn't. So was she ever clean? Like from what I'm seeing, I don't think that she was. And so if I'm in her shoes, I'm probably feeling like, what is the point? Like I'm never clean. I can never be with people. I always have to be outside the community. Anyone who touches me is unclean now. Like it's kind of like this life of isolation and not being seen because everyone is like, don't touch it, don't touch it. And I really feel like it's 12 years of that. I don't know that I would really want to be living that life anymore. You know, like that's really hard. There's no end in sight. And so the Bible says she spent all of her money on treatments. So she's not just alone with no future, but she's also broke. So it's just wild to me. I'm like, her quality of life must have suffered so much. And fear for her future and her circumstances stole her life. Fear often makes our lives smaller like that. Some examples of what we can face while the bleeding woman is facing this medical condition, we can face things like, you're afraid of what people will think of you, so you stop speaking in groups. You're afraid that you'll embarrass yourself if you try that thing you've never done, so you never learn anything new. You're afraid that your chronic pain will never end, so you seek comfort every chance you get, and you never understand the joy of denying yourself. You're afraid to correct that friend who's clearly in sin, because what if they don't want to be your friend anymore? Like those are all very real fears. And I don't know if you guys have seen Dune, the new one's coming out, but there's a quote in that movie that says, "Fear is the mind killer." I think it's epic. And fear, when it goes unchecked, it just makes your world smaller and smaller until life is really no longer enjoyable because you've trapped yourself in your own mind. You're just like, I'm stuck here. I can't get out. And I'm going to share just a little bit about my story and my fear. I haven't shared this story a lot, so it might be a little clunky, but hopefully you guys get it. But fear in my life has threatened my survival multiple times. When I was younger, I was diagnosed with IBS and an anxiety disorder, and that was the best titles they had for what I had at the time, but that's not really accurate. But the main symptoms were, with my anxiety, my main symptom was vomiting. So I didn't really have panic attacks. I would just, everything would come out. And so because of my vomiting, digestive issues, eating became my biggest fear. Eating meant pain for me. So I stopped eating, and I was extremely malnourished and underweight most of my childhood. And I almost needed an NG tube multiple times. And I wasn't able to get much help because I'm Hispanic, and my parents now they do, but their parents didn't believe in therapy. You're like, what's that? You just suck up and move on. So all through middle school and high school, I was just severely underweight, trying to survive by eating enough when my anxiety was calm enough and hoping that would last me before I had to force myself to eat again. So I just really did not enjoy food. And then when I got to college, the freedom of having a car and making my own schedule lessened my anxiety, and I was finally able to eat more regularly. And I gained 40 pounds my freshman year. And honestly, it didn't show like that. It just looked like I finally wasn't sickly because of how underweight I was. And I just felt like I was freed from anxiety. I was like, oh, it's all gone. And I actually like food now. It was like a whole new world. And I was just grateful. And then 2 years ago, my parents were getting divorced, and my mom came to visit me in Michigan. My anxiety came back with a vengeance. It was just like drop of the hat one day, boom. I was at dinner, gagged in the middle of dinner. I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't gagged in years. And I lost 20 pounds that month because I was just so scared to eat anything, and anything I could eat would come right back up. So I was terrified, and my fear was literally making my body like slowly waste away. I was like, I can't sustain this 20 pounds a month thing. Like, that's not gonna be good. And I wasn't sure how to overcome it because I didn't overcome it last time. I just outgrew it. Like, I didn't do anything. I just got older. But this time I went to therapy. I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, and I realized that so much of why I suffer with this is because of how painful and how long the suffering was when I was in my formative teen years. Like, I was just like, most of middle school and high school, those are huge years of your life that you're like building who you are in some ways. And most of it I was just spent like suffering, and I didn't really have a lot of friendships because of that. Like, I had to explain, like, yeah, I can't go out and sorry, I didn't talk. Like, it was just super uncomfortable. So yeah, it turned into a PTSD. And so it was so bad. My husband wanted me to share this. I was like, this is so TMI. But it was so bad that, like, when my husband would go into the kitchen, I'd be in the living room. He would go into the kitchen and open the fridge and just open up Tupperware, and I would immediately gag, just because my brain associated the sound of food. Wow. It was so intense. And after a few months of struggling with it, I was worried about, like, do I need to quit my job as a minister? Because I just felt really guilty. I was like, I feel guilty taking the church's money to take care of the college girls when I can't give to them in the way that I need to. Like, I'm barely able to survive as it is right now. And I just started to feel like I don't know how long this healing will take. And it feels like it's unfair to my campus girls. And luckily, I had great people in my life that were like, you're being unfair to yourself. Like, it has not been long enough. Healing takes time. Just do what you can, and they understand. And my girls were so great. I love them so much. One of them's right here. Anyway, but yeah, I felt like I also considered being checked into a treatment center. And because I was like, I've never been one to be afraid of like attacking my problems. I'm kind of a go-getter. And so I was like, check me in. I'll be there as long as you need me. I was ready to be done. And that wasn't the right answer either. I had to really just be patient. And so one day, I have some pictures in this time that I was supposed to show as a shares. One day, Max and I, my husband, we were having a leaders meeting in our home, and I couldn't be there because I was already having multiple panic attacks that day. So I just had to get out of the house. But I was so tired of feeling like I was constantly failing and getting angry with myself. So I decided to go to the bookstore and buy this book. It's a workbook called the Anxiety and Phobia Workbook. And it was a huge part of my improvement. Actually, my therapist was like, this is a book we recommend people when they can't afford therapy. And I was like, oh, cool. I wish we had known that before I started paying. But yeah, actually, I think I have a picture of the book too. Yeah, that's the book. And this book, like, it taught me a lot. But therapy honestly gave me the tools to give myself compassion. Medication helped me calm my body down enough to work on it. And the book taught me how to heal my thinking in a lot of ways. And I learned so much about negative self-talk and unhelpful coping patterns. And I realized so much of my war with my body was actually in my mind. And so I really started to work on these mental changes. And then I started to realize in therapy, so many of their tools are just the Bible. It's based on the Bible. And I have some examples of that. Like, I remember they were teaching me about how to replace negative self-talk. And I was like, what you're saying is literally just Philippians 4. It's like thinking about whatever's true, whatever is noble, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, what's admirable. Like, think about those things. Like, that's literally what you're telling me right now. And then there was another tool that I had where it's like, it's not helpful to be obsessed over anxiety. It kind of makes it worse. And so there's a helpful tool of distraction. It can be used unwell. But the idea is you have to process your thoughts and feelings with God. And then you can use a helpful distraction. So for me, that was like knitting or going for a walk. But it made me think of Isaiah, where it says, forget the former things, do not dwell in the past. I'm doing a new thing. I was like, well, we can't wallow in our past. Like, there is a time to move forward. There's a time to really mourn with God and talk with God and process all of these things. But there is a time to say, hey, we are going to get up and we are going to move on. I need to switch my thought process. We're not thinking about this anymore. And I kind of have to bully my mind a little bit and pull together. And that helped me, honestly. I needed those tools, and those tools, I was like, therapy, you're telling the Bible, you just don't know you're doing it. So anyway, some of the things that I did during that time that helped me was every morning, the second I woke up, I went on a walk. First I brushed my teeth because that's a gagging thing, but I would get out the door and go for a prayer walk. I had sticky notes literally on every door and wall of my apartment with just scriptures and statements that kept my mind positive. Yeah. And every morning when I would go on my walk, I brought a granola bar with me, and I would face my fears first thing in the day and eat as I prayed. My husband is so awesome. He ended up tapping the shoulders of the most spiritual men in his life. And they spent the day praying and fasting for me. And that week actually was the week that I felt the medication actually start working for me. And I started to stomach food again. And I was like, oh, it's like, this is happening. And it was I felt so loved knowing that people were starving with me. I don't know if that was, but I was just really grateful for that. And this is I also added this playlist, because that's another thing I would do. Praying was really hard for me during this time, because anytime I would pray, I get stuck in my negative thoughts. I'd get stuck in my anxieties, and so I couldn't pray without accountability. And that meant praying through worship songs. And these are only songs that end with faith, that are faithful songs. They're not wallowing songs. They are a little it's time, you can feel those things, but it's really about directing you back to God. And so that really helped me train my prayers to be hopeful again. And so after doing all those things and working through that with God, I had less and less panic attacks, and I haven't had another panic attack in over a year and a half now. Wow. So super awesome. But all of that to say, what happened? Okay, I'm gonna hope that it gets better. A lot of the times, our battles with fear are hidden away, and no one sees them. No one knows them like you do. And no one knows how exhausting it is trying to deny yourself and be on like Christ on top of all of the fears you're facing every day. And one of the practices that I had to do to start healing was bringing it to the light. And I really think that that's what this bleeding woman had to do. She had to choose not to be hidden. And I had to talk about it a lot with God. Like, God is like your main therapist during this time. Like, you talk to him about everything. And I talked to my loved ones. I talked to my discipler and my therapist. And being afraid to be seen as, like, looked as crazy or being checked into a mental hospital or all of those things, those came up into my mind for sure. Like, no chance it didn't. But I had to just realize that the more that I brought others into my battle in my mind, the more help I had to fight it. It's like, am I really going to worry about what people think about me more than getting help with what I'm desperately suffering with? And when it was just me in my mind, Satan's lies were so loud. His lies were just so loud when it was just me and him. And when I brought others into that battle, those lies got quieter. They got less powerful. It was me and God, everyone else fighting against Satan. Satan wanted me to feel shame, hide, and God wanted me to boast in my weakness because that's where his strength is. So I started to win the war in my mind, realize that not all my thoughts were true, and that believing my own perception of the world as truth was what was leading to all my physical pain. And so don't get me wrong, it's 2 years later, I still struggle with anxiety and eating, but I win a majority of my battles now. And the lies are less and less believable. Even this week, like yesterday, I was struggling hard. Like, I don't know why, but eating with people can sometimes be hard for me. And I've noticed that this week, and I'm like, okay, there's a lie taking root that I need to root out and bring other people in. But my body will show me before my mind does. It's just how God made me. And I really think that those lies, like the moment I noticed it, I was like talking to my husband. I actually told the people we were having lunch with, I was like, this is a thing. Let me prepare you. And they were great about it. And honestly, when I talked about it, it went away. I ate the rest of my meal. I had a great time. Like, I was like, it's crazy how much God, we really need each other. We need community. But Satan wants to keep us hidden. And so 2 questions you need to ask yourself at this point is, what has fear been stealing from you? And who do you need to talk about your lies to? I'll say it again. What has fear been stealing from you? And who do you need to talk about your lies to? You can't fight these lies without help. And you don't want to do that. Because the moment that you do it by yourself, you let them win, and you give up on more and more of your dreams, and your life gets smaller and smaller. And my second point after this one is reach. The bleeding woman was not fearless. She was clearly afraid, since she snuck up and just reached and touched his cloak. She was hoping to sneak off into the distance. She probably just wanted to be healed and slip away. Nobody sees her. She was just afraid, probably, to be publicly shamed again for being unclean. But that didn't stop her from reaching out. She snuck in, went a little way with the crowd, and she reached anyways. So imagine you're in a new class, and the girl who sits next to you is super intimidating. She's beautiful, super friendly, and you're like, she's so much friendlier, she's much prettier. But then you decide, like, I'm going to push through and I'm going to say hi to her. Okay, you do it, hoping you'll be friends, but then she straight up ignores you. And you're like, oh my goodness. You're probably going to walk away from that interaction thinking, I'm never doing that again, ever in my life. I was right to be afraid of her and avoid her. Exactly what I thought was going to happen, happened. And in that situation, you felt like you failed, so you chose to never reach again. What set the bleeding woman apart and her faith apart was how many times she reached and failed, and she kept trying. She spent all of her money on this. She was fighting to have hope for her future. And what inspired her to have hope again this time was Jesus.
Yeah.
She knew that this opportunity was worth another potential heartbreak. That is honestly so hard, having that hope consistently. And someone that I think really embodies this is Jaden. And I have a picture of her up there, but she's here, so you can see it live. So this is Jaden Rendell, and she has really struggled with overcoming her fear and pushing herself to do things she's afraid of. She's been an awesome intern in Ann Arbor with us, and she honestly has truly transformed to when she ghosted me when we first met. She was spearheading the women in Ann Arbor. So she's going to come up and share a little bit of her story, and that she can definitely relate to being timid, and we laugh about it all the time. I love her so much.
Hi everyone, like she said, my name is Jaden and I'm a senior at Eastern Michigan University. I'm super grateful to be a part of the Ann Arbor campus ministry and being able to talk to all of you today. So Sabrina asked me to share a little bit about my experience with this topic, timid to transformed. And when she first asked me to share, it made me laugh a little bit. I was like, me? When she first asked me, I was like, oh my gosh, but there's so many fears that I have not conquered yet. Sharing my testimony here is included in that statement. I was like, are you sure I'm the right person to talk about being transformed when I haven't finished my journey with fear yet? However, I did know that I could definitely relate with the timid aspect of this topic, so I was like, hey, I've got that part. Ever since I was little, I've been shy and afraid of just about everything. I have grown up hating talking to strangers, opening up to people, going to new places, and like I said before, public speaking has always been one of my greatest fears. And I never wanted to live this way, and I always dreamed of one day growing out of being shy, but I was just stuck because I was never bold enough to push myself in ways that would make that actually possible. Now, I figured if I was ever going to change, college is going to be my place to do it. Everyone's going to be new, so no one's going to know how shy I am. This is going to be my fresh start. But when it came time to make my decisions about where to go to school, I did not set myself up for success at all. I made my decision to go to Eastern because it was only an hour away from my home, so I could commute from there. And I'm sure you can all imagine how that worked out for me. I was commuting an hour. I did not magically become bold and make a bunch of friends. I retreated inward, didn't talk to anyone in my classes, and ended up with my family as my only support system. On a random day in October, God literally handed me the perfect opportunity to change everything when I was walking towards the library, and Sabrina walked up to me and asked me if I'm looking for a Christian community on campus. I said yes, I gave her my number, and I was like, certainly this will be the way I make friends. And then the texts from Sabrina start coming in, inviting me to sporting events and Halloween parties, and I got super intimidated thinking about all of the new people and all of the new things that I would have to try if I do this. God handed me the perfect opportunity to be transformed, but my fear won out, so I ignored all of her messages. Now, just a month later, my parents started to have problems in their relationship, and like I said, they were my only solid support system, so that also started to disappear. And after months of watching everything around me, just it felt like it was falling apart. I had just hit my breaking point. So in February, on one of my really long drives to school, I prayed a desperate prayer to God to help me out of this season of my life. And after I prayed, I got out of my car, started walking to the student center, and a guy named Plager walks up to me and asks me if I'm looking for a Christian community on campus. I was like, oh wow, this situation seems kind of familiar. I was like, but I said yes. So he gave me the group's Instagram, and he said his wife is going to message me, which she does immediately, and asked me if I'd want to get coffee to get connected to the group. And this seemed great. I was like, this is my perfect opportunity. And then I looked at the name, and it said Sabrina Plager. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know her. We've met. And I ignored her. And I was so embarrassed and ashamed about what I had done to her before. And I had just no idea what she would even think of me now. But it was so obvious to me that God had sent me these people for a reason. So I chose to ignore my fears for the first time and meet with her anyway. Now, when her and I met for coffee, it was blatant in our conversation about our families and our past that God wanted me to be on this faith journey with her. But I was still shy. That never changed. And I did not want to join the campus ministry. So she suggested that instead I start off with studying the Bible, where it would just be me, her, and another person. I was like, perfect, say no more, I'm in. And I was like, I love studying the Bible and having a person in my life to guide me spiritually, and everything was going great until she started to challenge me to come to campus events. She told me that God calls us to be a part of a community of believers and that it's an important part of my walk. And my first thought was, well, like, I already have you and Emily. Why do I need more people? Like, what do you mean? And this challenge really opened up my eyes about how long I had let fear keep me from living out the life that God calls us to. Now, it took me a few Bible studies before I started attending devotionals, but I eventually started to go very reluctantly. It was funny because my first devotional, I walk in and there's just over 10 men and no women in the room. I was like, oh, I'm in the wrong place. This is not for me. And I walked in, and so Sabrina and Emily finally got there, so I stuck to them. And I was like, okay, it started, and then they were like, we have to play a group game with a bunch of chairs. We have to go run to different chairs. So I was like, why am I here? I was like, I'm not a fan of this at all. So the second the game was over, I was like, okay, I can sit down in my chair. We'll do worship. We'll do the lesson. That's all I have to do. Okay, this part's fine. But I was really excited to leave. And I left the devotional that day really not wanting to come back because it pushed me in so many ways that I just had not been pushed in a really long time. But every Bible study, Sabrina kept saying, it's so important to have community as a disciple, so I kept going with a fearful and reluctant heart to these events. But I became more consistent, and I was finally able to get baptized on June 18, 2024. And I was just beyond excited and ready to finally and truly become that new person through Christ. But my baptism did not magically erase my fear of engaging with the community. I was still really afraid of attending every event, and my thoughts were just out of control. What if they don't like me? What if they think I'm weird? What if I never find any friends here? So I was attending these events, but I had not submitted my heart to God to be transformed. Eventually, I realized that I was always going to be ruled by fear if I did not choose to keep engaging and really embracing what scared me. Now, a verse that helped me through this process was 2 Timothy 1:7, which says, "For God did not give us the spirit of timidity, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." Now, I began to pray continuously to God to change my heart so I'm no longer going to be ruled by timidity. Please let Christ's power help me grow. Slowly, even though I was afraid, I started to have more conversations, tried new games where I might look stupid, made new friends, and even spoke in public from time to time. And it was crazy because after months of praying these prayers, I slowly stopped praying them because I stopped feeling that super intense anxiety. I stopped feeling the need to pray before every event because God had already changed my heart. And not only did God change my heart to no longer be afraid to attend devotionals, but he also helped me to love it. Devo was where I met my roommates, my best friends, and I saw myself doing things that I had never dreamed of doing. And it was eventually where I decided to do an internship with the church this past summer. Now, in that internship, I shared my faith with hundreds of people, led Bible studies, counseled at a camp with middle schoolers, and gave my own girls' devotional. And that's almost all of my worst fears wrapped up into one since I was childhood were wrapped up into this internship. But now each of them were possible because of how God has worked in my heart these past couple of years. Now, if I go back to when Sabrina first asked me to write this, I didn't feel qualified because there are still things I'm afraid of. Public speaking still is not my favorite. I can still get intimidated by big crowds, and sometimes I miss opportunities to share my faith because I'm nervous. But if I look back at how I started, I never would have even tried any of those things in the first place, which just really shows how God has truly transformed me and is continuing to transform me even more today. Now, my story shows that you don't have to be completely fearless to follow God, but we are instead called to reach out, especially when we're afraid, because it gives us an opportunity to rely on God's Spirit, love, and self-discipline. So I pray that each of you take advantage of the opportunities in front of you, find your disciplers like I had Sabrina that will help guide you through this process, and do the things that make you afraid. Do not let anxiety, fear, and timidity hold you back, because God can produce so many blessings in our lives when we choose to reach out to Him. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jaden. I feel like she's been such an encouragement to me because I honestly see her faith that God would bless her obedience. Like she shows up to fight her fears even after failing. Like there's been times that she's felt like I did not do that well, but I'm like, but you did it. And honestly, her faith encouraged me to keep showing up too. So I want us to ask ourselves, do you believe, okay, we're not good. Do you believe that God is worth fighting your fear? Is God your reason for denying your comforts? If he's not, you don't have enough motivation. Like he is the motivator. There's a way I was taught of thinking when I was really struggling with this idea. And it's the idea of putting the butt in the right place. So a lot of times we can say things like, I know God says I was not given a spirit of timidity, but that's just not me. Or God promised that his yoke is easy and his burden is light, and to come to him for rest, but I'm just so worn out and exhausted because life has been hard. I know loving people the way God calls me to means I should make friends in my classes and share my faith, but I don't think anyone will want to be my friend. And choosing to put the but in the right place, in all of these statements, the but is like right after what God says. You are choosing to make your fears louder than God. And instead of doing that, you have to flip the statement. Oh my gosh, I'm clicking this button and it takes me to a different spot. Hold on. 1 second. We're back. Okay. So, okay, so if you flip the statement, it basically says, I think it'll be really hard to change this about myself, but God says I was not given a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, love, and self-discipline. So I believe that with the Spirit, I can do this. Life has been so hard and exhausting lately, and I'm tired, but God promised his yoke is easy and his burden is light. So I believe that I will feel this way if I keep trying to draw my strength and fulfillment from God. I don't really think anyone wants to be my friend, but I know loving people the way God calls me to means I should make friends in my class and share my faith, regardless of if they appreciate who God made me to be or not. All of the previous statements said, fear is greater than God. But when you change where you put the but, it becomes God is greater than fear. You have to put the power where it belongs. You cannot give your power to motivate you to do these things to Satan. You do that when you give fear the power. How you think affects so much of what you do. And I really struggled with this because I felt like if God was truly more powerful than my fear, he should be able to heal me immediately. Like, snap his fingers and I'm done. Like, this isn't even hard anymore. And I didn't understand why he wasn't doing that. I was like, why? Why did he suffer? And eventually I realized that God didn't want to take all of it away because it had a purpose. It was challenging me to deepen my faith that God was capable. And because of God, I am capable. And one of the big ways he showed me this was something called exposure therapy. So when you have a phobia, therapists will encourage you to try exposure therapy, but you have to decide to do it. You cannot be forced to do exposure therapy or it will traumatize you forever. But basically, it's just putting yourself in the same situation repeatedly that you're afraid of to prove to your body that you don't need to be afraid. So this meant for me forcing myself to eat, even if I had a panic attack or throw up, and to take small bites at a time. And there were times where I was like hyperventilating and sobbing while I was eating. And there were times when my fears came true, where I threw up in the middle of my meal. And I couldn't keep food down, even though I was starving. And when that happened, I had to find motivation about why I was going to keep going. Like, why try again? Why keep doing this? And my exposure therapy one day was so hard. I was trying to eat this meal, and it was so difficult. I was so depressed at that time that I had to celebrate the tiniest wins. Like, the tiniest wins. Like, I ate a bite of that meal. I would really go on a prayer walk after and be like, God, thank you. Thank you so much. Just crying and trying to remember that moment. And you have to remember those things because they help you to keep, like, they build your faithful memories. And I have something called my Hall of Faith. It's a note on my phone where I write down all of the moments that I felt like God was faithful to me. There's the Hall of Faith in the Bible in Hebrews 11. You need to make your own. And so those moments were so important. I even made voice notes for myself where I was like, Sabrina, you got this. What you just did, you ate some yogurt. Like, it was so bad. But it worked. One of my voice notes during this time actually said, like, we do this for God so we can live life with purpose. It's be glorifying to Him. And I can't help people become Christians if I can't even enjoy my life, or if I'm ungrateful for the life that God gave me. And I can't eventually have children and be a great mother, all of these different things. Like I was trying to remember, why am I pushing through? And my hope and my faith to keep trying, it needed to be anchored in God. It didn't mean that my problems and fears disappeared. They were still very present, but I had to learn that God honors imperfect faith. He doesn't want me to try the hard thing when I'm promised a good result. He wants me to go and engage with that hard thing and bring all my fear and my pain with me, even when it goes poorly, and then get back up and do it again, because He's the reason we do it. And what we put our faith in matters more than the strength of your faith. You have to remember that your faith in Jesus is so much more important than how strong it is. You just have to show up being willing to be faithful. He will provide for us. You can't let our past experiences keep us from reaching for Jesus. Imagine if the bleeding woman decided to just not reach that bit. She was just like, I'm done. I've tried so many times, and it's failed in the past. I'm not going to do it. When you do that, Satan wins. You just stop trying, so he wins. If he can get you to stop trying because you failed when you did try, then he wins forever. The part of transformation that the bleeding woman encountered, this part of it took persistence. It took determination. It took guts. You cannot let that person you shared with, that cursed you out or made fun of you, stop you from sharing your faith. You can't let that friendship that you fought for but ended up betraying you stop you from being yourself with a new friend. You cannot let bullies, whether it's other people or yourself, because you can be your own bully, stop you from being who God made you to be. You will do hard things in your life. It's inevitable, and you will fail. We always do at some point. But failure cannot determine your faith in what Jesus can do. Being afraid of your faith, of sharing your faith, says I care more about what they think of me than I do about their eternal life. When you don't share your faith, you're basically saying, I'm scared, and so you can literally go down. That's terrifying that we let our hearts get there. Our love for people cannot be that shallow. When we're afraid to call out sin in a friend that says, I care more about our friendship than I do about your relationship with God. I don't really care about seeing you in heaven. I just care to make you feel good right now. That's not okay. That's not real friendship. Being afraid to answer that calling to do missions or go into the ministry says, I care more about the comfort in my life than using my life for God. Thanks God for my life. I'll take it now. This is mine. There's no gratitude in that. In all of these things, you are Lord, not God. When we get baptized, like we heard the first night, we say, Jesus is Lord, not you. So I want to be clear, being afraid in and of itself is not sin. That is normal. Fear will come. This is natural, but what we choose to do with our fear, that is where our sin comes in. When we choose to sin, when we put ourselves as Lord, we choose to let those fears determine our actions and our beliefs. You have to have grit and determination to overcome this part. It requires discipline, taking ownership of what you can control. You cannot say, this is happening to me. You have to remember, like, this is your mind. You have control over what you think. Satan wants to convince you you don't, but you do. You can have unpleasant thoughts and let them pass. Don't entertain them. It's okay, we're going to let that one fly by. You don't have to let them feed into your fear. You have to get indignant with your sin. You have to be done letting fear control your life. Whenever you're ready to repent and lean into the battle, these are some questions that help with that battle. What do you need to accept ownership of and go to war with? And what do you need to hold on to when your fears come true? I'm going to leave this slide up, but Hannah's going to come up now and share about what it means to be called daughter.
Okay, so they were so amazing. I'm gonna close us out here with one more point, but so relatable. I mean, even if you can't relate directly to both of their stories, they just brought us into that passage where we can connect with someone. I mean, who here has bled for 12 years? Anyone? Maybe, I don't know. But I thought maybe we could try to see if there's something we can all relate. So let me see, like, who is a mom? Any moms? There's a few. Okay. Anybody let's see, do you have a sibling? Are you a sibling? That's a lot. Wow. Okay, but I still see a few people who aren't. Okay, is anybody here a daughter? I just want to check if anyone's confused. Okay, yes, we are all someone's daughter, whether they are involved in our lives anymore, whether they were good parents or not, whether they were two parents or one, like you were birthed out. Science has not made us like, I think they are growing babies in labs and stuff like that. I don't know yet, but you were at this point. Everyone was birthed. Okay, so we are all daughter, right? Oh gosh,
Yep, that happened to me.
Okay. So that brings me to this point about being a daughter. And when I was studying this passage out, I love looking at the cultural context or the context in general of a passage, and where things are placed in the Bible means something. I think God is he's an artist, he's a creator, and he doesn't make mistakes. And the story of the bleeding woman seems to be intentionally placed and sandwiched actually between a story about a daughter. So Jairus' daughter, you might not be familiar with her story, but Jesus was on Jairus came and said, Jesus, my daughter needs you, like she's dying. And then Jesus goes on his way, and this woman stops before Jesus could get to Jairus' daughter. So it's this story about a daughter, and this woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, she's an older woman. Even like thinking about Jairus' daughter, like we don't know her name, she's just Jairus' daughter. So there's we don't know the bleeding woman's name, she's just the bleeding woman. But there is something that they're both identified by, and that's daughter. And I thought that was so interesting to think about, like, why is the one time that Jesus deliberately calls someone daughter sandwiched between this story about a daughter? And I think it's something for us to think about and relate to. What does that mean for me to be a daughter, right? So there's other connections too. The daughter was 12. She was about 12 years old when Jesus raised her from the dead. And the bleeding woman had been suffering for 12 years. And the number 12 would have meant something to this original audience. To us, it might not mean that much. But around the age of 12, a Jewish girl entered womanhood. It was a significant coming of age season, often marked by the beginning of her period. So very relatable to this bleeding woman. And so we don't know exactly how old the bleeding woman was, even if she had been bleeding, even if she had just started bleeding at the age of 12, that means she would be around 24. So she's not necessarily a young woman. We just heard Katrina talk about how young Mary was when she had Jesus. So this one was even older than Mary, who had become a mother. So she's more into her adulthood. So she could have been a mother herself. She could have been a widow. Maybe whatever her story was, after 12 years, she probably, like us at this point in our life, could have accumulated many different identities that we maybe don't identify as a daughter so much anymore. I think especially entering college years, you're kind of like, I'm independent, I don't need my parents anymore. You deep down know you're someone's daughter, but now you're like, I am a woman, I am becoming something other than just someone's daughter. But, bringing back to this part of her story, I keep clicking instead of going down. Let's just read this part of the story. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." So, as Jaden and Sabrina were helping paint this picture, somewhere along the way, her condition could have become her identity. But then Jesus stopped. For some reason, he was determined to stop and look at this woman and say to her, "Daughter." And I don't think it was just like this sweet moment that he was having with her to connect necessarily in like a gentle way. It's the only time in all the four gospels that Jesus personally calls someone daughter. And before he tells her to go in peace, before he tells her she's healed, before she walks away, he reminds her who she is to Jesus. Not just like she is a daughter in general, she was birthed by somebody, but identifying as Jesus' daughter. He calls her daughter. And this is not just for this woman. The story of this woman is a moment for us all to put ourselves in her shoes, because we all have labels we can carry. Maybe yours is anxiety. Maybe it's being ashamed. Maybe it's perfectionist. All these things. Maybe it's I'm not enough. Maybe it's I've messed up too many times. Maybe you've become so familiar with your struggle that it feels like your identity. But Jesus, he says, "Daughter." And that identity changes everything. But I just want to convince you a little bit more, because sometimes when we're reading scripture, we're like, does this really apply to me? Is Jesus calling me daughter as well? How do we put ourselves really in her shoes? And I want to read you some of my favorite scriptures that on this topic that can put us in her shoes. So my favorite chapter in the whole Bible is Romans 8, but I'll just read for you verses 14 to 16. Paul says, "For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, 'Abba, Father.' The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children, daughters and sons." But for this room, we'll just keep it to daughters. Another one that helps paint this picture for us, puts us in the shoes of being called daughter by Jesus, is Galatians 3:26 to 27. "So in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ." And finally, 2 Corinthians 5, verse 16 to 17. "So from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Though we once regarded Christ in this way, we do so no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come." So that this one is, I have this one included here because of Galatians 3, if you can see it. If you can see here, it's talking about our baptism and what happens when we are one with Christ, a new creation, just like 2 Corinthians talks about. And so I just want to talk about that for a second. Baptism is not just something we do. I think we all remember or have studied out, or maybe this is a new idea to you, you can study it out more with someone, but the moment I think about baptism very clearly, especially after last night, is the moment we go from darkness to light, the moment our sins are forgiven. But this moment is also the moment that Jesus says the old you isn't your identity anymore. You belong to Jesus. And I think sometimes we get that backwards and kind of like what Sabrina was giving us, that let's flip this. But we can think, if I finally overcome this sin, if I become more disciplined, if I get my life together, then maybe I'll really be God's daughter. But that's not the gospel. The gospel is that because Jesus has made you his daughter, you now live from that identity. So for whatever it is for you, repentance isn't trying to become God's daughter over and over again. Repentance is returning to the identity he's already given to you. It's remembering whose you are. And this is something I have to remind myself of all the time. One place where I struggle with timidity, which is why I feel qualified to be speaking to you, because I am also a timid person, is in sharing my faith. I think, I live in New York City. Has anyone visited New York City or lived there? Okay. I talk to people all the time. They're like, I don't know how you do it. I'm like, me either. But, being a Christian anywhere can be a little unpopular these days. But I think specifically in New York City or a lot of major cities, I talk to a lot of people from the Bible Belt, and they talk about all the struggles of sharing their faith there. And I'm like, but come on. What about, that seems like it would be easy. No one's laughing in your face about Jesus in the Bible Belt, maybe. But I think it's not just always that I'm not so popular when I talk about Jesus. It's that most times I am very unpopular. I've had people laugh in my face when I tell them I follow Jesus. Even moms that I talk to that I feel like this felt like it was only in college, but no, still adults kind of snicker when I tell them that I follow Jesus. And I've seen people dismiss Christianity before I even get to explain why it is what I believe. And if I'm honest, it affects me. There are moments when I hesitate to share my faith or invite someone to church because I start worrying, will they think I'm weird? Will they think I'm naive or uneducated? Or will they think I'm going to judge them? A lot of these things can go through my mind before I speak to someone about Jesus. And I find myself shrinking back. And just a few weeks ago, I was out on campus at NYU, New York University, with some of our campus students. And each of us was getting open. Sometimes I'm like, how do you feel? Is this hard for you? Sometimes you try to, when you're sharing your faith with people, try to act tough or this doesn't scare me. But I was like, guys, I do not want to talk to people right now. How are you guys feeling? And everyone had their own insecurities and why speaking to strangers about our faith is scary. And most of the responses I found really did boil back to putting our security or lack thereof in what other people we were speaking to were thinking about us. And I've realized that my biggest problem in these moments isn't that I need to toughen up or just be bold or shake off my shy or push aside my anxieties. For me in these moments, it really is that I've forgotten my identity or I've put my identity in what these people think of me or their approval. Yeah. And then I'll stay if my identity is based off of people's approval, then I just stay timid. I will not talk to somebody. But if my identity is that I am a daughter of God, chosen, loved, forgiven, accepted, then suddenly other people's opinions, for some reason, they just don't carry the same weight. Yeah. But I don't walk around daily remembering that identity as often as I think I should. And I think about how courage doesn't come from believing more in yourself. It comes from believing what God says about you. Yeah. And I think that's exactly what happened to this woman in this moment that she got to have with Jesus, that he made sure she got to have with him. She reached for Jesus timidly because she thought she needed to stay hidden, just like Sabrina and Jada were talking about. But Jesus wouldn't let her stay hidden, not because he wanted to embarrass her, because he wanted to give her restoration. He wanted everyone, including her, to know that she wasn't defined by her condition anymore. She belonged, she was loved, she was seen, she was his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So what identity have you been answering to lately? Is it failure, fear, anxiety, perfectionism, your past? Or are you identifying with the identity that Jesus gives you? Because when you truly believe who you are, everything begins to change. You don't obey to earn God's love, you obey because you've already been loved. You don't pursue holiness because to become his daughter, you pursue holiness because you already are. And the bleeding woman came to Jesus identified by her condition, and she left as daughter.
Wow.
So I hope this was helpful for you guys. You know, I think we can hopefully all now put ourselves in their story, or at least relate to somebody else. And I think just relating in general can be like a freeing experience. So I'm so grateful that God decided to put this story in the Bible, and that we can all identify in it. And instead of doing a Q&A, I love retreats. If you're like me, which I think some of you are, they can be terrifying to like meet new people or connect with somebody or even raise your hand. I think we saw that in the beginning. So we're not going to do a Q&A in this moment. We have a few more minutes left to just talk with one another. So I just want to encourage you to get in groups of 3 or 4 and discuss these 3 questions. So use whatever time we have left. Lunch is technically 12:30, so we have a little bit of time here. Take a picture, get the number of somebody new here, but one of my favorite ways to meet people at conferences is in breakouts, because you all came here for very similar reasons. So make a new friend, connect with somebody, and discuss these questions. Thank you guys so much for coming.